Okay, we're going to begin now, and I want to very briefly introduce Pavel Leszkowicz, and simply say this, that in many respects, one can assess the shifting fortunes of the queer community in Poland by looking at the life and career of Pavel and his partner. And those fortunes have shifted enormously just in a few decades. Pavel, in 2001? When did Ars Homo?
2010.
2010 did Ars Homoerotica, which was a massive exhibition at one of the big museums in Warsaw, widely celebrated, full of queer art, and before the decade was out, was essentially in exile in Berlin because of a new government that had a particular bone to pick with his partner. So it is quite always quite clear the political stakes of what we do when we leave the confines of where we are now.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you. So I would like to thank Jonathan, Johnny and Melissa for bringing me here and the Alpha Out Foundation. It is such an honor and a visual pleasure as well to be here to see the exhibition and Chicago and all of you. So I am very happy to be at this moment in this country and in this place. The title of my presentation is The Significant Absence. Even though there are many queer artists from Central and Eastern Europe, I'm going to focus on two who were supposed to be part of the exhibition but are not. First of all, I would like to emphasize in a slightly narcissistic way that Central Eastern Europe is important for queer history, and we have of course some very important fundamental developments in modern art and the histories of sexuality in Central Eastern Europe, including the foundation of psychoanalysis, Freud and his families from Galicia. We have the invention of the word homosexuality by a Hungarian journalist. So Central and Central Eastern Europe is definitely this part of the globe and this part of Europe that contributed significantly to the culture of non-heterosexual, non-heteronormative politics, activism, culture. And I will focus on two painters whose works, although initially planned to be included, did not appear in the exhibition due to the rejection or deliberate ignoring of official loan requests. These artists are the Polish painter Maria Dulembianka and the Slovak-Hungarian painter Laszlo Medynański. But first of all, I would like to start with the map of Central and Eastern Europe in the 19th. So we deal here with three empires, the Russian Empire, the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I am going to focus on the Austro-Hungarian empires and countries like Slovakia, Hungary and Poland, because those artists were associated with this region, and all those empires very severely criminalized homosexuality, especially male homosexuality, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire was the most liberal one, both in terms of culture and cultural freedom and in terms of sexual freedom, if I may use this term in relation to this period. Especially Budapest was considered the queer center at the time of this region of Europe. And now focusing on those artists. In case of Dulembianka, the Polish painter, the request to borrow portraits of her partner, the Polish poet Maria Konopnicka, were deliberately ignored by the management of Maria Konopnicka Museum in Żarnowiec, located in eastern Poland. Eventually, the museum director told me over the phone that he did not approve of presenting the relationship between these two women as romantic or erotic. And this region of Poland is still heavily influenced by the Catholic Church and by the conservative politicians of the Law and Justice Party, who lost power, but in Eastern Poland they still have very important position, and the museums, as you know very well in Europe, they depend on the state money or the regional money. So there is always politics involved in the program and in the running of museums. And the works of Laszlo Medynański are housed in the Slovak National Museum and the Hungarian National Museum, both located in countries currently governed by queerphobic right-wing political parties. Initially, the Slovak National Gallery approved the loan and signed the loan agreement. However, the loan was ultimately blocked by the far-right Ministry of Culture in Slovakia. In official letters, the reason given for blocking was falsely related to the problematic ownership of the paintings, ownership issues, not the ideological censorship. And both Dulembianka and Medynański were outstanding artists from this part of Europe, still relatively unknown outside the region. The queer aspect of their lives and work gives them particular relevance and strength today. This is why conservative institutions and government are trying to suppress their international exhibitions and museums reception, which emphasizes the painter's place in queer European art heritage. However, I want to emphasize that in local academic art and cultural history, some biographical studies have been already done about the non-heteronormative aspect of their work and life, and I am very deeply indebted to these earlier studies. We've heard here a lot of criticism of art history, but in case of those two artists, their queer lives and queer work have been very well researched by Hungarian, Slovak and Polish art historians, but also writers who write artist biographies. Therefore, the decision made by the museums and ministries in Poland and Slovakia are purely politically motivated and rooted in homophobia and censorship of curatorial freedom. So let me begin. I will focus on the presentation of those two incredible personalities of Central and Eastern European art at the turn of the century. So I will start with Slovak-Hungarian painter Baron Laszlo Medynański. I'm going to call him Baron from time to time because it sounds very good for me. And the pronunciation of his name is difficult, as I am not Hungarian, even though I dealt with the Central and Eastern European part of the research. But I would like to emphasize that the Central and Eastern Europe is very, very diverse. We have many countries with very complicated history, with completely different languages. We don't really understand each other. So we deal here with a vast diversity of cultural, legal system and cultural systems and influences. So going back to my Baron. So he specialized in very moody landscapes and portraits. His models were mostly dispossessed working class men, peasants, Roma, over those paintings are called, we use the term gypsies, beggars, convicts and soldiers. The class-crossing approach was inspired by his travels, social compassion, sensitivity and desire for men. Born in an aristocratic family, he distributed his possession, part of his possession, and lived and worked as an artist close to the lower class people. His portraits of men monumentalized the sitter in an introspective approach. He combines realistic and symbolic aesthetic. The poor men become the allegories of the traumatized human subject, but also of raw masculinity. Their faces and eyes express wounds of life and despair, but confront the viewer with a strong and seductive gaze. Violence and suffering of masculinity preoccupied the artist's imagination. Hence, his figures are tragic and mysterious, looking like people from the margins of society and existence. They look haunted, yet still desirable. Moreover, Medynański was a very prolific painter, left hundreds of drawings of wounded soldiers of World War I, as he worked as an artist war correspondent. It was a perfect occupation for a painter, fascinated by darkness, death, and masculinity. The mysticism of death and decline suffuses his male portraits with an otherworldly aura. Medynański painted or drew during his lifetime perhaps hundreds of men. In the portraits, there is an element of the erotic, often with darkness and physical suffering. Therefore, the paintings of Caravaggio or Ribera or Rembrandt are brought up as an inspiration. The painter shares with us, with other turn-of-the-century authors, the expression of homosexuality or sexual otherness through the dark style of decadence. But Medynański departs from the decadent context because, unlike many European decadents, he does not cultivate the aristocracy. Being a nobleman is for him worthless. He is fascinated by the world of the people, their vitality, but also their suffering. And we haven't thought yet about the issue of decadence, which is very important for the expression of queerness in European, including Eastern European art. So the culture of decadence that quite often appears when we look for artists that dealt with the subject of queerness was focused on the androgynous, sickly, dark, obsessive, praying figures. The European decadent movement means decline and degeneracy. It was a wide-ranging cultural current that became popular in Europe, very much in Central and Eastern Europe as well, in the late 19th and early 20th century, exactly at the time when the first homosexuals were entering the cultural and the intellectual worlds. The decadent movement was characterized by the feeling of loss of vitality, of the loss of vitality, force, and moral standards, fears of impending gloom and sexual transgression. It was part of the fin de siècle erotic milieu of femme fatales and androgynous masculinity, where man appears to be at the mercy of dark, blind forces and sexual obsessions leading to sickness or drug addiction. So as you see, it is very topical right now as well. And I would like to emphasize the culture of decadence because you really find fascinating portraits and self-portraits of male and female androgyny and melancholy in this art movement. I've mentioned that there were many scholars that work on Medynański. I would like to emphasize particularly the role of Martin Putna, a Czech historian who very early, already in the 1990s, was writing about the issue of gayness in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech lands. And for Martin Putna, Medynański connects philosophy with homosexuality and divinized men. I would like to emphasize the role of the esoteric movement, of a variety of esoteric movements that were thriving in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century. Already it was mentioned in the Swedish case the role of esoteric movement, of anthroposophy, of in case of Medynański, theosophy, various kinds of mysticism, and queer artists particularly were drawn to those alternative intellectual and spiritual movements, seeking a different way of life, of course, or a different meaning, or asking different set of questions. So according to Putna, Medynański, inspired by the mystical movements, divinized men in his paintings. Now I am showing his paintings of soldiers from World War I. And the divinization is especially evident, and the religious ambient of his portraits of poor and lost men, including many portraits of his dead lover, Balint Kurdi. I'm going to show his these portraits in a moment. How do we know about Medynański sexuality and life? We have the diaries, and of course the Hungarian and historians and the Slovakian historians, they've read the diaries, and in his diaries the painter was already using the word homosexual, so he was familiar with this development to create a space for his self-definition and identification for a group of like-minded people. The artist's queerness is confirmed then by his diaries and letters, and they were all published in 2019 in Slovakia, which often invoke, and in this writing he often invokes his partner. In terms of an emotionally motivated love for the common people, men especially, the painter can be seen as a continuator of the ideas of the English social philosopher Edward Carpenter. It is a vision of homosexuality as a socially progressive force, transcending class boundaries in European 19th century societies, sharply divided between nobility and the people. Thus, even in the Central European art of this time, one can find the ideas of the American poet Walt Whitman, a champion of mystical brotherhood between people across class lines with a distinctive homoerotic dimension. The paintings are then stylistically decadent, but socially anti-decadent, calling for a new, more open, and at the same time more spiritual society. So the portraits reveal a still refreshing and important connection between homosexuality, socialism or social involvement, social engagement, and decadent aestheticism. So these are the drawings of the soldiers of World War I. There are also some male nudes among his paintings, male portraits. The mood landscape that I emphasized at the very beginning. And this is the portraits of his partner, Valiant Kurdi, whom he very often painted. Another important tradition for Medynański is the idea of romantic friendship, affirming lifelong emotional bonds between men or two women, oscillating between mere friendship or eroticism. This is a common and precious model of 19th century queerness, which is perfectly expressed in the painter's writing devoted to his lover. Love mysticism permeates his vision of common and abject masculinity. Therefore, in the published interpretation, people tend to see his portraits as atmospheric and compassionate, not exploitative. The men are deeply human, hence compelling. The Baron specialized in the impressionistic landscape of his Upper Hungary. His homoerotic portraits are landscape of male faces from the region who disappeared in the abyss of time and still haunt us from Medynański paintings and hundreds of drawings. He stands at the borderline as a marginal yet central figure from Central Eastern European art at the turn of the 20th century. Baron was an open same-sex lover whose desire was directed towards working class men, but also a rebel who rejected his privileged class to focus on the people, driven by the ideas of social justice and compassion. To put it shortly, queer socialist or even an anarchist, as so many gay men in history. So this is one couple, Laszlo Medynański and Balint Kurdin. This is the mansion Straski, a castle, a manor house that belonged to Medynański family. Baron lived there. Right now it is part of the system of the Slovakian National Gallery, and it is also a museum devoted to Medynański and some of his paintings, including the kneeling convict that was supposed to be in the exhibition is shown here in the castle. The castle is considered the Slovakian national treasure, and to some extent Medynański, who was only recently discovered as a queer artist in the last 10 years, has been for a very long time considered as one of the most important Slovak-Hungarian painters of the region. So we are dealing here with an artist who is considered a national treasure. And now I'm going to move to the second artist. So this is the image of the convict from the castle. And I'm going to move to the second couple, this time female couple from Poland, who are considered a national treasure as well. And their relationship is a subject of a quite intense discussion in the history of Polish literature and art. So the painter that I'm going to talk about right now is Maria Dulębianka. This is a young photograph of Maria Dulębianka. Dulembianka, and this is Maria Dulembianka, the painter, with her partner, the famous Polish poet and poetess and writer of prose and poetry, Maria Konopnicka. So we moved from the Hungarian male couple to the Polish female couple. To discover the new another major location in Central Eastern European queer geography, we need to travel to Poland, to a small village Żarnowiec in the east-south part of the country. It is where between 1903 and 1910 two women, Maria Konopnicka and Maria Dulembianka, lived together in a manor house, which the former, Konopnicka, received as a national gift. Today it is the Museum of Konopnicka, one of the most outstanding poet-writers in the history of Polish literature, which holds also the largest collection of paintings and drawings of her partner Dulembianka. The two women, a writer and a painter, spent together 20 years until Konopnicka's death in the bucolic manor house, mainly in the summer and in the spring. Dulembianka set up a studio to paint, but as a first-generation suffragette, those women were also Central Eastern European Polish suffragettes. So this is the first wave of feminism that we are talking about here. She was even more devoted to the fight for women's rights in art and politics. As an artist, she primarily painted portrait studies of women and children and intimate genre scenes, often depicting the poor, like in the case of Medynański. So this is the very eastern part of Poland, which is still under the control of the far-right politicians, where the manor house in Żarnowiec is located, where those women lived for 20 years together. And these are two portraits by Dulembianka of the famous Polish poet Maria Konopnicka. As an artist, she painted women and children and the poor, and she was another socially minded and charitable queer artist from the time of the first Homosexuals. So I've picked up Medynański and Dulembianka not only because they were queer, not only because they were from Central and Eastern Europe and their loans were denied for the exhibition, but also because they were artists and activists. So we talk about very often today about artivism, which is a crucial term for contemporary art, but of course there is nothing new in the word ever. So when we deal with those artists from the turn of the century, both Medynański and especially Konopnicka and Dulembianka were artivists for the rights of the poor, but also for the rights of women to vote and for the rights of women to study at the fine arts universities in Poland, because women were in Poland were allowed to study at the academy very late in 1918, after the end of the First World War. An excellent portrait painter, Dulembianka studied at the Académie Julian in Paris, like many women from all over the world in the 19th century. Today, Académie Julian, I have to emphasize it, I should keep to my text, but I can't. Académie Julian is a name that, of course, many of you are familiar, but it is especially important for the history of women painters in the 19th century, but also queer women painters. Dulembianka studied in Académie Julian. It was a private school for women in Paris. But also many queer American artists from North America, and as Peter McNeill researched for the book, discovered many queer Australian artists, women artists, came to Paris to study in Académie Julian, and Dulembianka was part of this crowd. Dulembianka was already very active as an artivist, because women at Académie Julian, they had to pay twice the fee that the men paid. The argument that was put out by Julian, the director of the school, is that the women are are from aristocratic families and they have money, because otherwise they would be never able to come to Paris and to study art. That is why they can be charged more. And for men to study art is kind of revolutionary. They go against their family will. They are poor there, not founded by the families, and that is why they pay less. And Dulembianka was, of course, very as a suffragette, as a feminist. She protested against the situation, the financial inequality in the Académie Julian, and was part with some other Nordic women as well, participated, organized a protest against this inequality. But today the artist is famous mainly for the portraits of her partner, Maria Konopnicka, that belong to the canon of Polish culture. So if you are a child in a school and in a book, you have always photographs of Maria Konopnicka, and usually these are those paintings by Dulembianka, but because of course she was the closest person for Maria Konopnicka and also became like her an official portrait painter. Yet their relationship has been acknowledged only lately in Poland, and with difficulties and opposition from the nationalists. The authors of their biographies have been struggling with how to describe the long-lasting and affectionate female couple from the turn of the century. Their life together was not controversial at the time. It was socially accepted, and the younger Dulembianka was considered the guardian of the famous poet Konopnicka, who, as a critic of the Catholic Church, was a scandalous celebrity. In the same way as Dulembianka, Konopnicka was also a suffragist. She was very much involved in this, not only as a writer, but as a scholar of folk culture, as a scholar of Polish Jewish culture as well. And the relationship was seen as a great friendship, with the emphasis on the mutual support and devotion of Dulembianka, called faithful companion by the press. She took care of the older national writer, whom, before they met in 1903, was married and already had 8 children. So here we have the situation of this complicated personal lives. Thus far, such terms as life partners and even sisterly connection have been used to describe their same-sex love, including the American notion of Boston marriage. This is how contemporary Polish historians, biographers try to describe the relationship between those two women. At the turn of the 20th century, the formation of such female couples was not an isolated phenomenon, known in American women's history as Boston marriage, and that is why the Polish historian used this term. It was not uncommon for female artists, writers, and scientists to bond with like-minded partners with social consent, wanting to further their careers and seeking solitary support and freedom of creativity outside of the conventional marriage and the burden of men. More often than not, it is difficult to assess to what extent a tenacious female friendship was romantically or erotically charged. And this is exactly the subject of speculation in Polish history about the relationship between Dulembianka and Konopnicka. Yet there seems to be no doubt from the perspective of queer history, as both women were open in their diaries about mutual emotional affection and closeness, even though we don't have letters because the children, 8 of them, I don't know if they did it together, but they burned the letters. But we have the diaries. There is the manor house where they live together in Żarnowiec. So these are the portraits of Konopnicka by Dulembianka, displayed in the museum in Żarnowiec. This is another portrait of Maria Konopnicka by Dulembianka. This is the Académie Julian, women in the school in Paris. Dulembianka is somewhere in the back. These are some other female portraits by Dulembianka. And this is a very interesting painting by her after the sentence, and I would like to remind you about the painting by Medynański that was supposed to be here, the kneeling convict. This is a kind of similar iconography of imprisonment or suffering or being a convict. This time this is a female character, and of course we can read it in a very symbolic way because they belong to the symbolic movement as well, impressionistic symbolic movement in the art of the turn of the century. But at the same time you have to remember that Poland, for example, and as well Hungary, Slovakia, these were countries that were under partition, that were taken by the Austro-Hungarian, Russian and German Empire. So they were colonized, basically, right? This part of Central and Eastern Europe were colonized, and for example in Poland we had many uprisings against the colonization of the Russian and the Prussians, and people were fighting against the colonization and were killed, put to camps in Siberia. So that is why the iconography of suffering can be connected with the losing of national freedom, but of course as a very symbolic paintings we can read those portraits as a representation maybe of queerness and the feeling of queerness at the time, so they are open to many readings. So these are the impressionistic symbolic portraits, example of the impressionistic symbolic landscape of Dulębianka, and this is the manor house in Żarnowiec. And I would like to point your attention to the issue of queer architecture, especially queer, domestic, intimate, interior architecture. There's the entire field of study in the history of architecture, in contemporary queer art history, that deals on not figurative representation, on abstract representation, but also of reading of spaces, reading of architectural design. And I think that the house of those two women in Żarnowiec, as well as the castle in Starsky that belonged to the Medynański and his family, can be an excellent example for queer architectural interpretation. And in this house in Żarnowiec you have many portraits by Dulębianka and many paintings by Dulębianka as well. The poet allowed Dulębianka to portray her in personal moments, inaccessible to others, yet always in respectful and serious portraits. This was the image that Konopnicka, as a literary person at the time, painted and photographed by many preferred the most. In her drawings, Dulębianka portrayed Konopnicka during everyday intellectual activities, such as reading and writing. The poetess is dressed in domestic clothing, often with glasses designed for reading, expressing her emotional states of thoughtfulness and relaxation. According to the painter's notes, they met for the first time in early 1889, just after Konopnicka separated from her husband, and from then often traveled together around Europe, something with other family members. Moreover, they were both social activists for the poor and women's rights. Thus they can be considered not only the Polish example of the Bostonian marriage, but also the local suffragettes with the international European connection. Especially Dulębianka was involved in feminist emancipatory activities. These are all her political and artistic social activist actions that I've put here on this in these texts. I'm not going to read all of them, of course, but this is very important, the artivist aspect of her life and the political involvement in women's rights movement. So Dulębianka was involved in feminist emancipatory activities. She persistently advocated women's rights to vote and to study, concentrating on the admission of women to Krakow School of Fine Arts, which was allowed only in 1918. She also offered art criticism. So she wrote about art and is one of the pioneering feminist art critics in the region, and lectured about women in the arts, and her publication on the subject are groundbreaking in this geographic context. After Konopnicka died in 1910, Dulębianka devoted herself almost entirely to social, charitable and feminist work. Where she moved permanently to Lviv, Polish at the time, her pursuit included museum curating. She became the public face of feminism in Lviv, a city in today's Ukraine, of course. Galician and Austrian newspapers reproduced her distinctive butch likeness, always with short hair, binoculars, of course crucial for the lesbian image, and modest masculine attire, wearing a suit and a bow under her neck. This is also how she represented herself in self-portraits. Her fashion style defied the prevailing norms regarding female dress. For many queer women, men's clothing was synonymous with freedom and liberty, especially for women painters, of course, like Rosa Bonheur, Romaine Brooks, also the Croatian incredible painter Nasta Rojc, whose self-portraits we have in the exhibition. Dulembianka practiced this sartorial freedom and defiance in the Eastern European margins. The paintings representing her companion are executed in post-impressionistic style, but with symbolist psychological darkness, with an accent on the texture of the paint. Stylistically, they belong, of course, to the 19th century, yet their subject is distinctively modern. There are no better and more consistent same-sex female love manifestos in the art of Poland in the entire 20th century. Clearly, those two artists, Medynański and Dulembianka, shared a deep social commitment to issues of equality, the emancipation of the marginalized, and a profound ethical approach to the art of portraiture. Both experienced wars firsthand, becoming its witness and participating in wars, standing alongside its victims. So I would like to finish emphasizing the incredible similarities between those two queer artists from the turn of the century. So first of all, they both were born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and died the same year, 1919, in their late 60s, as a consequence of war. Medynański worked as a war correspondent of the Austro-Hungarian front lines of the World War I in Galicia and Serbia. And he never recovered from the war wounds that he sustained when he was the art correspondent. Dulembianka, of course, worked for the Red Cross, very obvious for her, organized relief effort for Polish soldiers interned in Ukrainian prisoners of war camps after Polish-Ukrainian War of 1918. In the camps, helping the soldiers, she contracted typhus, from which she died. They both painted moody landscape, impressionistic symbolism. Both are famous for their portraits of women in case of Dulembianka and of men in Medynański. They both left manor houses, which are tourist attractions, which are considered like jewels of national heritage. And I believe that in the future, they can become an import in a better future, if we have a better future in Central Eastern Europe. They will become a very important queer tourist destination. Their art, they were also, of course, non-heteronormative individuals living in an era when homosexuality was criminalized, but also during the earliest phase of the emancipation movement in which they participated. Their art grew out of the landscape and human characters of Central Europe, yet was also rooted in the international culture and spirit of the emancipation at the turn of the century in Europe and North America. They travel extensively. Their works have survived in local museums, so it's not destroyed, it's very well preserved, and local collections, and are regarded as national treasures in both countries. However, the museum world remains largely close to queer curatorial practices around their legacy, often ignoring the work of art historians that have been done. Meanwhile, in the last 10 years, the entire region has been experiencing a growing wave of political conservatism, fueled by extreme queerphobic ideology spreading from Putin's Russia. There could be hardly a more urgent moment to exhibit Medynański and Dulembianka, ideally together. Their historical art, placed in new contexts, including queer ones, would be not only illuminating, but also profoundly political, something museums shy away from today, fearing financial censorship from radical right-wing governments. Thank you very much.
So I want to introduce Pavel Golubev, who is actually from Putin's Russia, and wrote a dissertation including queer components in a brief moment when such things were possible in Russia, but quickly became persona non grata, was persecuted by the Russians, and with remarkable foresight left Russia in exile to, of all places, Ukraine. And then worked as a curator in Ukraine at the Odessa Museum, where we contacted Pavel, only to, of course, see the war begin there, and then through the efforts of the University of Pennsylvania and its Scholars at Risk program, were able to get Pavel out of the Ukraine and to the United States and to safety. Unfortunately, the program specifies that you are not a resident of the United States. This is one of the ways it gets through all this stuff. So Pavel had to leave after 2 years, and Pavel is now working at the Institute of Slavic Studies at the University of Potsdam, and hopefully will land a wonderful position in Europe. Pavel Golubev.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for such a great presentation of me, my academic journey, and so on. Of course, I'm very grateful to Alpha Wood Foundation, to Alpha Wood Exhibition, to Jonathan personally, and to Johnny, to Melissa, to Chirag, because it was so important to feel support through this challenging time. And yes, that's true. Actually, this project completely changed my life, or my life has changed during this project, during this 5 years or something like this, because I was starting as an independent scholar in Russia, and then I returned to Ukraine, then the full-scale invasion, evacuation of the museum, and now I'm here. That's so good. So the project not only develops the queer history of art, but it could even probably save lives, because who knows what would I do in Ukraine now, because I don't know, I was stuck with all the situation, and however, everything's everything is for the good, and I'm very happy to present my subject and my research, the history of homosexual art created within the Russian Empire and later in the Soviet Union remains largely unwritten. And in this presentation, I focused on the intersection of three developments. First, the consolidation of modernism itself, which is connected largely with the name of Sergei Diaghilev and his circle, because probably someone maybe knows, somebody probably not. Before it came to ballet and opera, Diaghilev was a art magazine editor and art curator in St. Petersburg. The second development is the emergence of homosexual themes, patterns, motifs, symbols in the work of a particular artist. And third, the formation of urban homosexual culture in the empire's major cities. These were not parallel or linear processes. Modernism reached different parts of the empire at different times. Artistic development, political condition, and social structures varied widely. As a result, the forms and meaning of queer visual imagery took on distinct shapes across different regions. I think that from this point of view, all the national queer art histories should be written, and I hope that it will happen one day. But I propose probably for this presentation exclusively, probably a little bit more universalizing approach. I hold on the best documented setting, which remains metropolitan Russia, above all St. Petersburg, the former capital of the Russian Empire, and to lesser extent Moscow. And that is largely thanks to the work of the historians, literary scholars, anthropologists, and sociologists beginning in the 1990s. For example, Dan Healy wrote a brilliant monograph on homosexual desire in revolutionary Russia, and Kevin Moss and his research was very useful as well in the sense of queer literature practices, and so on. And their research relied on newly opened archives, state collection, institutional holdings, and even the archives of the former security services, police, and so on. And this material became accessible only after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But that opening was brief. In provincial archives, little changed. In many post-Soviet countries, access came much only later. In others, it has never come, often because male homosexuality remains criminalized there, like in Uzbekistan or Belarus. In Russia, it was formally decriminalized in 1993. But in recent years, it has been effectively recriminalized under laws targeting so-called LGBT propaganda. Nobody knows what is it, but I'm sure that what we are doing here now is LGBT propaganda. Actually, of course it's funny, but it is absolutely terrible because in some situations it is only a fine, a very large, however it is bearable, but sometimes it is connected with an imprisonment. And for example, one person, I'm sorry for this, one person died because he organized kind of trips, holiday trips for men, for gay men, and so nobody knows what was happened in the prison, but the person likely committed suicide, and all these things happens again and again, and many queer people left Russia during the last years and probably even before. However, a lot of queer people are unable to go to the Western countries or to the safe places because they are forced to stay because of their family circumstances and so on. So back to the research and back to the archival sources. Many of the sources used by researchers 20 or even 10 years ago are no longer accessible. Thus restoring in effect the restrictions of the Soviet period and the Soviet regime. And I'm a relatively young scholar, and everything that happened on my eyes during the period of my activity in Russian academia. So when Karl Maria Kertbeny coined the term homosexuals in 1869. Russia was ruled by Emperor Alexander II. His liberal reforms of the 1860s profoundly transformed imperial governance. Most significant was the Emancipation Reform of 1861, which abolished serfdom across much of Central Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The long-term effects of this reform were uneven. But one of the immediate consequences was the acceleration of urbanization. Formerly enslaved peasants moved to the cities in looking for a job because Russia, before that, Russia was mainly agricultural. Looking for a job in increasing numbers. In the 1860s and 1870s, the shift laid the groundwork for industrialization and the emergence of a new urban working class. By the 1880s and 1890s, police report observed in St. Petersburg a wide range of homosexual activity among cab drivers, domestic servants, bathhouse attendants, soldiers, sailors, and members of the clergy. From the variety of experiences, a nascent homosexual culture began to take shape. And actually, this is a photograph from the Dan Healy monograph, and here is the bath. The bathhouses were probably one of the major centers of the city homosexual culture. And it was not the bathhouses sought out the banshiki, the bathing attendants. So nobody posted advertisement like the bathhouse is seeking for nasty bath attendants who are interested in men. No, so groups of men from the same village would migrate to the city and collectively choose a job because it was practical. They support each other, they shared all the income, and so because of specific connection or usually or any other reasons, they decided to be waiters in the restaurant, or chimney sweepers, or road workers, or bathing attendants, and that went absolutely normal in the big cities, and and because of this, bathhouses become places of kind of rural solidarity, and then Healy explains in this monograph that Russian peasants, the newcomers in the city, were very known about the homosexuality in their rural cultures, and for example, with intersection with their landlords, and it was treated absolutely normally, surprisingly, in so-called homophobic Russian society in the 19th century. However, the Russian Orthodox Church didn't treat all same-sex acts equally. While anal intercourse between men was condemned as a serious sin, other forms of contact were generally treated as venial, comparably to masturbation, and rarely punished harshly. In Russian legislation as early as an 18th century, Peter I had introduced criminal penalties for sodomy, so the church language, in the army. Later, in 1835, these were extended to the civilian population. Male homosexual acts were criminalized under statutes that prescribed up to 5 years of exile in Siberia. However, the law said nothing about lesbians. Furthermore, no large-scale campaigns against homosexuals took place under the imperial regime. By the 1890s, discussions of homosexuality had begun to circulate more freely within Russian artistic and intellectual circles. However, if the criminal code used the term sodomy for homosexual intercourses in the community, inside of the community, the other language was used. Partly it came from Greece and Grecian notions like pederasty, tribadism it is absolutely same in Russia, like tribada, so that meant lesbian, katamite or katamite, probably a kind of young prostitute, or probably a young man tended to have the contacts with men, and so on. However, much of this activity remained private, but it left behind a visible trace in correspondence, in collections, and eventually in published works. In St. Petersburg, a key figure in this cultural underground was Alfred Nurok, a state official and collector. His home became a site of informal study and self-education. The circle included Walter Nowell, a future music critic and former associate of Pyotr Tchaikovsky, Dmitry Filosofov, a philosopher and publicist, and Konstantin Somov, then an aspiring artist and the son of the Hermitage curator. Later, Filosofov's cousin Sergei Diaghilev joined the group after moving in St. Petersburg, and all these guys were gay. Reportedly, when Diaghilev moved from Perm to St. Petersburg, probably to dismay of Somov, who may have been romantically involved with Filosofov. Over time, the informal gatherings coalesced into the editorial board of Mir Искусство, or World of Art, a monthly journal that marked Diaghilev's first major initiative before his later work in opera and ballet. Launched in 1898 and modeled in part on a British magazine, The Studio, Mir Искусство championed aestheticism and provided an opportunity for modern artists to challenge dominant trends in the art of the Russian Empire, especially academicism and the social realism of the wanderers, so-called передвижники, which often prioritized moral critique over aesthetic experimentation. In the the bathhouse again. I want to show you Diaghilev, and this portrait was created by Leon Bakst, who probably was not queer, not homosexual. However, he was like a court artist of Diaghilev, and when Diaghilev needed something, usually the first person was Bakst. And so I will show you a lot of many artworks by Leon Bakst, and looking at them, so you have to know it. And in the inaugural issue of Mir Искусство, guided in part by philosophers' thinking, emphasized the primacy of individual personality in art. He envisioned the artist as a sovereign figure, free from external constraints. In this opening article of Mir Искусство echoes also a philosophical outlook of Vladimir Solovyov, one of the most influential thinkers of early Russian modernism. Solovyov's work combined elements of Christian mysticism and Gnostic syncretism, unified by his idealist notion of unitotality, the belief that all, or the concept probably, that all existence tends towards spiritual and material wholenessness. So between 1892 and 1894, in a 5-part essay titled The Meaning of Love, Solovyov developed a theological and philosophical framework in which love becomes the highest form of divine communication. He proposed that sexual difference arose from the rupture of a primordial unity, an original androgynous being split into two through the material consequences of creation. God, as he envisioned, remained whole and invisible, while humanity fragmented, sought to restore that lost unity through love. This restoration was not symbolic alone. Solovyov emphasized that true love involved both spiritual and bodily union. In the merging of two individuals into one, love manifested the divine principle of wholeness. The ultimate goal of such union was not procreation, though that too was part of divine creativity, but rather the experience of self-sufficient and transformative love. For Solovyov, love transcended social, moral, religious norms. Even the fetishist genius attachment to an object, he argued, could reflect divine eros more truly than a purely physical act devoid of inner connection. The influence of Solovyov extended well beyond mere искусство. It resonated with symbolist writers such as Alexander Blok, Andrei Bely, and Vyacheslav Ivanov. But there was another source of thought about gender. In the early 20th century, the search for spiritual and erotic transcendence led many Russian symbolists to take an interest in religious sects, especially those that practiced bodily extremity. Groups such as Hlists and Skopci rejected normative sexuality and pursued salvation through ecstatic rituals, self-torturing, and in the case of Skopci, even castration. But the artist who probably most fully developed a visual language around these questions was Konstantin Somov. So, as I said, Somov was the son of the curator at the Hermitage Museum and received his training in the Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg. And later, he trained also in Paris in the Academy of Julian. And in 1898, the same year Mir Искусство was founded, he painted a self-portrait that shows him reclining as a melancholic dandy on an antique coach. But he also painted another image around the same time, portrait of the Marquise, a half-nude figure in an 18th century wig with a painted beauty patch and the Somov's own face. The image introduced a recurring figure in Somov's work, the Marquise, a feminine alter ego who would appear repeatedly in the form of masked woman, aristocratic ladies, or grotesque seductress. In a diary entry from 1914, Somov wrote, "The women in my paintings manifest longing for love. Their faces express sadness or lustfulness, a rejection of myself, my soul, my attraction to men. Their broken poses, their deliberate ugliness are a mockery of myself, and at the same time of my eternal femininity, which is against my nature." The Marquise embodied this contradiction. Moreover, in the homosexual slang of the time, Marquise was an euphemism for a feminized male sex worker, often used alongside other ironic titles and nicknames such as baroness or princess. Another common term, tyotka, meaning auntie, referred to men who often assumed the dominant role in relationships with younger male partners. Somov's visual language, shaped by this subculture, was heavily theatrical. His figures, Harlequins, Pierrot, and Marquise, moved through imaginary landscape modeled on 18th century fête gallant, but filled with a distinctly modern melancholy. In his major erotic project, The Life de la Marquise, and this is an illustration from that, that was an anthology of erotic literature, was first published in Munich in 1908 and continually revised throughout his life. For many artists of this generation, Greek subculture offered more than a style or motif. It provided a visual and ethical model, a civilization in which male beauty was idealized and same-sex desire was legitimized. On stage, above all the production of Sergei Diaghilev, this classical legacy was re-imaged in motion. Through the ballet rules, Diaghilev brought together music, design, and choreography into single spectacles that merged symbolist atmosphere with the central charge of ancient myth. Among the most provocative examples was Après-midi d'une femme, choreographed and performed by Václav Nijinsky. Inspired by Mallarmé's poem and set to music by Debussy, the ballet rejects traditional technique in favor of stylized low-to-the-ground movement. Nijinsky's faun, designed by Leon Bakst, moved not with a grace but with tension. He post-compressed and animal and erotic. It was Greece seen through modern eyes, fragmented, mysterious, and I would say quite unsettling. A related figure was Ido Rubinstein, who was born in Kharkiv, who is now Ukraine, who originally commissioned Diaghilev for a different version of the same poem. Tall, androgynous, and known for playing both male and female roles, Rubinstein gave form to the ambiguous eroticism that had long circulated in Russian art. Her stillness theatrically and a refusal of conform to bourgeois femininity made her both an object of scandal in all the world capitals and a new kind of modern icon. And actually this is the Bakst drawing for Saint Sebastian. 2 years or 1 year earlier than the well-known tragedy. Several years later, in Poltava, Ukraine as well, the eccentric Ivan Misaedov, son of the realist painter Grigory Misaedov, cultivated a radically different yet equally embodied vision of Greek-inspired art. Trained in St. Petersburg and known for his physical strength, he performed as a wrestler in the circus for many years. Misaedov found an artistic commune he called the Garden of the Gods. Between 1910 and 1913, he staged nude or custom tableau vivant stands featuring himself and close associates, including Vsevolod Maximovich and Fyodor Krzyzewski, also from Ukraine. Ukrainian symbolist artist Vsevolod Maximovich displayed a genuine dedication to creating large-scale erotic paintings imbued with a distinct decadent ambience reminiscent of an opium den. His meditation on androgyny and gender fluidity appear in his paintings such as Kiss and Nudism. So this is, however, I'm pretty sure that that's not the author's titles. So they were renamed. Maximovich paintings, I think that they were renamed in Ukraine in the National Art Museum where they are keeping now. Interestingly, the latter bears a resemblance to Eleazar von Kupfer's two figures dancing in Eastern dress. You probably remember from the presentation and the exhibition itself. So interestingly, whether by chance or by direct influence, both works display notable conceptual parallels, using characters that mix male and female traits together as they spin around their spinal axis in a dance that reveals and conceals their dual natures. Following the collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917 and the Civil War in Russia, the Bolsheviks introduced reforms that secularized social life. The abolition of the imperial criminal code formally decriminalized male homosexuality in the early USSR, and throughout the 1920s, some homosexual marriages even occurred. However, their legal status remained unstable. In the early 1920s, the Soviet government organized expedition to Central Asia, including to Uzbekistan, to study and preserve medieval Islamic architecture. Among those sent was the symbolist painter Kuzma Petrov-Vodkin. While not yet known to have identified as homosexual, his work from 1910s, such as Boys Playing and Bathing a Red Horse, often depicted nude boys and themes of bathing and reflects a deep interest in the male body. Petrov-Vodkin and other artists working in Samarkand, which is now Uzbekistan, developed a hybrid visual language that echoed both Sufi mysticism and European aesthetic tradition. In Samarkand, Petrov-Vodkin encountered Daniil Stepanov, a portrait medalist who had earlier studied in Italy and had same-sex relationships with Sasha Schneider while living there. Stepanov through marriage with children, relocated to Samarkand, seeking a more stable life during the post-revolutionary years. Among the younger artists joining these missions was Alexander Nikolaev, later known as Usta Mumin. He converted to Islam, adopted an Uzbek name, and immersed himself in local culture and language. His work centered on young Uzbek boys, especially bachas, boys from poor families trained to sing and dance in feminine roles. In traditional Central Asia society, bachas occupied a complex and often eroticized position, driving admiration and financial support from male patrons. Another significant figure of that period, however, not in Uzbekistan but in metropolitan Russia, was Yuri Yurkun, born Jozas Yurkunas in Lithuania in 1895. He was a partner of Mikhail Kuzmin, one of the most prominent person in queer Russian literature, who, among the others, writing after it the first gay Russian romance, The Wings, in 1906, and that was actually a novel about which included all this specific venues and specific sites of the homosexual culture in the early 20th century, like the bathhouses and so on. And it is translated, as far as I know, in English, so everybody can read. And Joseph Yurkunas was a partner of Mikhail Kuzmin and shifted from literature to visual art in the 1920s and 1930s. His drawings after lesbian erotic scenes were marked by fast, chaotic lines that exaggerated the dynamics of same-sex desire. By 1934, under Stalin, male homosexuality was recriminalized, with sentences up to 8 years in prison camp. Female homosexuality, though not officially outlawed, was frequently medicalized. Moreover, homosexuality was portrayed as politically suspect, even anti-Soviet, a view encapsulated in notorious Russian and Soviet realist writers Maxim Gorky's notorious Pravda article declaring, exterminate the homosexuals, fascism will disappear by itself. And the connection with fascism comes from the foreign policy of the Soviet Union in 1930s, in the mid-1930s, when the Soviet regime officially opposed, before the conclusion of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, so at the time the Bolshevik regime opposed to fascism and Nazism. And so that was a kind of Gorky mirrored a kind of official rhetoric. So in 1938, shortly after Kuzmin's death, Yurkun was executed during the height of the Stalinist purges, so-called Stalin terror. As state repression intensified, homosexuality was rarely the formal charge. Accusations of espionage or anti-Soviet activity became standard, as their outcomes were nearly always fatal. Outside the USSR, life and immigration offer a measure of freedom. Artists who left often moved quickly from coded imagery to open representation of same-sex desire. Konstantin Somov, who immigrated in late 1923, produced some of his most explicit works within months of arriving in France. In Paris, Somov gradually moved away from masks and allegories, from all the historical stylizations. He began to draw his partner, Boris Snishkovsky from Odessa, in direct nude studies, still staged but no longer veiled by historical fantasy. Where the Marquise understood, there was now simply the male body drawn with tenderness, precision, and erotic clarity. And this is another painting from the exhibition. Actually, I will say several words about Somov and so in the project a little bit later. And so that's Pavel Chilishev, also from the exhibition at Whitewood 659. He was, in his young age, he was associated with Diaghilev as well, and he very wanted to work with him when Chilishev was young in the late 1920s. And he did that, and he became a collaborator of Diaghilev, however, for a very short time, because Diaghilev died in 1929. And after working with Diaghilev's ballet Russes, he became a part of the Parisian avant-garde and later the American Immigrant. His work moved increasingly towards surrealism and metaphysical question, and there were also also younger artists than Chilishev, for example, Andrei Avinov, who formed completely in immigration. So he started to draw in the pen in the United States or probably earlier in France. And he developed this queer surrealist imagery. For many queer artists of the Russian Empire and its successor states, as you can see, the path forward led through displacement. And here probably I would like to stop because if we look forward into the period after the Second World War, we will see that this connection between late imperial or early Soviet art disappeared. So because of time, because many queer artists died to that moment, some of them were killed. However, there is no inheritance with the so-called second avant-garde and the early Russian modernism. So it like started again. Like probably every queer history of art, which I want to believe at least will flourish after each repressions and so on. Thank you.
So this is a question. This is a question about the early Soviet avant-garde. We've seen so many, this thread through all of these talks about classical themes and drawing from Greek and Roman themes. But in your talk, you're discussing in these works in relation to symbolists, and I know that they were working a lot with, Scythian and pre-Christian Slavic classical antiquity. So I was wondering if that was something that you noticed in your work, if these painters were also drawing from that canon of imagery and mythology, or if it was more strictly associated with Greek and Roman.
Yes, thank you for the question. Of course, I showed only a little span, on the several examples of the queer art from the late Russian Empire. Of course, the repertoire was much larger. There's a kind of coded symbolist images. Actually, there were very popular the caricatures, the portraits, and this is also important. So this stylization and all the historical subject, this trend actually mirrored the analogous Western trend in Western Europe. And Russian society at that time were a lot of resembling features with the Western societies. I mean, the nostalgia, like for the old regime, notwithstanding that at that moment there was no revolution in Russia because of the industrialization and all the social shifts. The gentry and most of the artists of that time, including the person from the Diaghilev circle, they were noblemen, and so it gave us the opportunity to reflect about their nostalgia, like losing position of the class and so on. So yes, the repertoire was quite larger. I don't know anything about avant-garde. I mean, you probably mean suprematist artists who were homosexual and which artworks we could analyze. However, probably in the future we will find something. And I actually wanted to add that the future of the research in Russia and in most of the post-Soviet countries is connected to the future of the regimes which are ruling these countries now. So probably we will find something. However, there is nothing evident except probably one canvas by Ukrainian artist Alexandra Ekster, who was probably not queer, but she showed two of her friends, women friends, female friends, who and the canvas, so the artwork was made in a kind of transition style from symbolism to avant-garde, and but probably this is the only artwork I know which we can do.
Great. Other questions?
Well, I do have something to say. Well, all I have to say is that I think Pavel and Pavel, we have two very significant individuals here. Individuals that have spent their entire lives fighting against the oppression and erasure of queer people and lives and histories in hostile environments, people who have faced exile, and I just want to invite you all to celebrate them, and just, to me, you are true heroes, and I think to all of us. I'm sure I won't have any questions, because okay, yeah, Patrick, right.
I'll ask one just really briefly on that note. I really appreciate what you're saying, especially like Johnny said, being at the front lines of this. I would just say, to an audience that may or may not be many Americans and many people who don't know that, is there any takeaway you want us to have? Any ways in which you'd say that queer people in these oppressed countries or issues can be helped? Any small things, just things that come to mind, people you want to illuminate, efforts you want to signify to us? Anything at all like that?
You mean in relation to contemporary situation?
Yes, just
I may say that Poland has been under the rule of religious fundamentalists for 8 years. They lost the power two years ago. So Poland right now, being for a very long time a very conservative and queerphobic country, suddenly became central right and almost liberal when it comes to culture, because we have a new Ministry of Culture. She's a woman, and she's a progressive woman. And when the country was under religious fundamentalists, of course there was censorship. It was a financial censorship. Institutions that were organizing queer or feminist exhibitions, they were penalized by taking money from them by the government. And right now, so it sounds familiar to all of you, of course.
Yes, it does.
Which is of course surprising, because this is the big difference between Europe and the United States, that I was always taught, and it was emphasized by my American colleagues, that you are independent from the federal governments as a cultural institution, and all cultural institutions, 99% of them in the European Union at least, they are dependent on local governments and national governments. That is why when the government changes, the new people are in the Ministry of Culture, and they decide how to distribute the money. And this is the big problem that we are struggling with, how to disassociate the grants from the governments when it comes to research and when it comes to exhibitions. Some countries in the European Union do it very well, others still struggle with it. And so in Poland we have a very progressive minister right now, and queer art thrived under the religious fundamentalists, but in alternative institutions, right? Online, alternative institutions, quite often supported by the local governments that were controlled by the ruling religious fundamentalists. So during this period of repression, a lot of very progressive queer art has been born in Poland, especially when it comes to queerness. Also the general society understood how important queerness is and queer rights for democracy, and the same thing is happening right now in Ukraine, of course, because Ukraine is fighting Putin's Russia, and the center of his ideology is homophobia. So people in Ukraine, they can understand that homophobia is not acceptable anymore, because this is something that is brought to us by Russians as part of the Russian colonization. So the period of oppression gave power to the sexual opposition and all the other feminist opposition and other forms of opposition. And suddenly, right now in Poland, a lot of organizations are doing queer exhibitions and queer projects, because finally the art that has been thriving at the margin has a chance to be exposed and financed by the Ministry of Culture. So, but on the other hand, politically, we are still behind, because there is no same-sex marriage, abortion is still criminalized. So the politics has not changed, but the cultural politics, like always, has been progressive. So what I just wanted to say that that you will overcome. If it was possible to fight the religious fundamentalists after 8 years in Poland, so that would be possible in the United States as well. And of course, this is the moment when the visual arts, the academia, the art activism is going to reinvigorate the intellectual and artistic life in this country in the future as well. So the moments of oppression, they are terrible, there will be many victims, but the change will come. I am optimistic, but
I'm optimistic as well, but probably not in like in this perspective, not in the same way. So because everything is very gloomy in Russia, of course, as I described, and as you probably know. However, Russia is a country when everything can change just in one moment, and the historical precedents exist. I would say. However, this is nothing for now, because the people suffering, and there are many organizations which help the queer people to leave Russia in especially harsh circumstances. So if you can, please help them, and it matters.
In Poland, we have millions of refugees from Ukraine, from Belarus, and dissidents from Russia as well, and especially many queer people are dissidents in Poland. And for example, for the last 2 years, my main curatorial and art historical work was about contemporary queer Ukrainian and Belarus art. So it also invigorated my own research, and this is the main good thing that I can say about Poland, that at least the country accepted so many refugees from the eastern countries that are at war now, or the Belarusian artists that had to escape because of the heavy oppression under Lukashenko. So from this point of view, doing research about this subject is very important, and including artists from the region in exhibitions and projects that you organize here is very important. So,
one more kind of question or comment rather. So Pavel, I know we didn't quite get to the moment where you're able to speak at length about Soma, but can you maybe share a little bit of the story about the work that you did to try and get some of those works out of Ukraine or into safety?
Oh, so
just briefly.
Oh, yes.
It was such an important story.
Yes, thank you so much. So probably my most important production for Ukraine before the full-scale invasion began was the exhibition of Konstantin Somov at Odessa Fine Arts Museum. And that was in 2019, and that was actually a very huge exhibition, because they have a very large collection of Somov's work, a very large body, and we did that in the State Museum in Ukraine. That's absolutely crazy for Russia or for Belarus, but in Ukraine it was possible. And the exhibition was accepted very well by the common public, and there were no specific troubles in this regard. And then, when I returned after the COVID pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, the Odessa Fine Arts Museum was closed. I actually did not so much, except the evacuation of the museum. And we were the first museum who was prepared to the evacuation by the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion. This is probably, that was probably my most significant input. However, I'm sure that the colleagues will do everything without me, because all the Ukrainian museums were evacuated pretty quickly at that.
Can I add to that? That when we did the first iteration of the first Homosexuals, for those of you who had the chance to see it, you will note that there were a number of works by Somov, and that was because Pavel helped us to borrow work from the Ukraine collections in the middle of a war. It was really quite something. And so, thank you.
And that was, and just a few words, and that was probably the first appearance of the artworks from the Ukrainian state museums here in the United States, and this is what the project did.
Okay, so we'll have about 45 minutes for lunch. We'll meet back here at 2:45. Sorry to rush everyone.